Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a topic that's, well, it's everywhere: green issues.
Hmm.
We're trying to cut through some of the noise around how businesses impact the environment. Everything from pollution, sustainability, and even how companies talk about their green efforts.
Which isn't always straightforward.
Not at all. There's just so much information, so much spin sometimes. So, our mission today is really to distill it, pull out the key ideas, and hopefully give you a clearer picture.
Yeah, and understand the connections. These aren't isolated issues. They're all tangled up together, shaping how businesses operate and, honestly, how we all live.
Right, and maybe uncover a few things that aren't immediately obvious. Okay, so let's dive in. When we talk business impact, I guess the most direct thing is pollution, right?
Absolutely. That's the starting point for many people.
So for a company, what does pollution actually cover? What are the main types they really need to get a handle on?
Well, fundamentally, it's any damage, land, sea, air, that happens because of what a company does, its activities.
Okay.
And we usually break it down into, say, three main areas. First, there's air pollution, probably the most visible, or at least the one we think of first.
Smokestacks and things.
Exactly. Toxic emissions from chimneys, factories. We're talking harmful gases, tiny particles,
Uh-huh.
particulates. It's not just smoke, it's the chemicals within it.
Got it. So the invisible stuff, too.
Precisely. Then you've got water pollution. A big source here is effluent.
Effluent.
Yeah, basically toxic liquid waste. Companies sometimes discharge it into rivers or lakes or the sea.
Mm.
And the impact on aquatic life, the water chemistry itself, can be pretty devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, there's waste disposal, just how companies handle their solid waste. If it's done improperly, you get significant land pollution, sometimes ocean pollution too. Think industrial sludge, leftover materials, packaging.
Can I imagine some pollutants are much worse than others?
Oh, definitely. Some carry really severe risks.
Yeah.
Take radioactivity, for example.
Mm.
Nuclear power plants, they have very strict rules. They have to monitor levels constantly. But even with those minimum permitted levels, you have critics saying any level is unacceptable. There are real concerns about long-term health and accumulation.
That makes sense.
And then, maybe even more broadly concerning, a lot of industrial pollutants are actually carcinogenic.
Meaning they can cause cancer.
Exactly. Which adds a whole other layer of seriousness. And that's why governments step in. They don't just suggest changes. They impose really stringent regulations to force companies to limit this stuff.
It's not optional.
Not at all. It's about protecting public health, protecting the environment. The rules are there for a reason.
Okay, so stopping that immediate harm, that direct pollution, is obviously critical.
Mhm.
But what about the stuff we use and then throw away, the waste we generate after the production process?
Ah, yes, that's the next big piece of the puzzle, moving beyond just preventing the initial pollution.
Which brings us to recycling, I suppose. It feels like it's become this huge focus. Why has recycling become such a central strategy? And what's the argument against the old ways, like landfills?
Well, recycling, at its core, is just converting waste back into usable materials, giving things a second life.
Right.
Its importance is really underscored by regulations now. The European Union, for instance, has specific rules about the percentage of product content or packaging that must be reused or recycled.
Must be. So it's legally mandated.
In many cases, yes. And that applies to household waste and industrial waste. It forces companies to think differently about materials.
Okay, that's a big push. But I've also heard recycling isn't always, the perfect fix. Are there downsides or complexities?
That's a really important point. It's not a magic bullet. For example, the economics can be tricky. Recycling certain materials, especially some plastics, can actually be more expensive or even use more energy.
More energy than making new plastic.
Sometimes, yes. Depending on the type of plastic, the sorting needed, the transport, the processing energy, and it all depends on whether there's a market demand for the recycled material. That fluctuates a lot.
Wow, okay. So it's not as simple as just tossing it in the blue bin.
Not always, no. But the principle is vital, especially when you compare it to the alternatives. Supporters of recycling make a strong case against traditional methods, like landfills.
Just dumping it in a hole.
Right. And the argument is we can't just keep doing that forever. Landfills take up huge amounts of land. They can, like harmful chemicals, leachate into the soil and water for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they generate methane, a really potent greenhouse gas, as stuff decomposes.
Okay, so landfills are a long-term problem. What about burning it? Incinerator?
Incinerators reduce the volume of waste, which is one benefit.
Yeah.
But burning waste creates its own problems. Air pollution from the emissions, and toxic ash that still needs careful disposal.
So Neither is ideal.
Compared to keeping materials in use through recycling, no. Recycling is generally seen as a much more sustainable path, reducing the burden of both landfills and incineration.
Okay, so we've gone from pollution control to managing our waste through recycling, but that still feels like dealing with the outputs. What about the bigger picture? How we use resources in the first place? This seems to lead into sustainability.
Exactly. That's the broader concept,
Yeah.
moving beyond just waste to how we manage everything.
So what does sustainable actually mean for a business? It's not just about waste, right? It's about resources.
Precisely. Sustainability is about managing natural resources, forests, fish, water, minerals, so they aren't depleted. So they're still available for the future.
Keeping things going for the long haul.
Yes. Operating in a way that maintains the resources your industry actually depends on. It's thinking long-term, not just short-term extraction. For a company, it means weaving this thinking into their actual business strategy.
Can you give some concrete examples? Where does this really play out?
Sure. Think about deep-sea fishing. A sustainable fishing operation needs to manage its catches to make sure fish stocks don't collapse.
Mm.
That might mean quotas or rules about fishing gear or closed seasons.
To avoid overfishing?
Exactly. Or look at logging. Sustainable forestry means replanting trees, reforestation, or reforestation to ensure there are future timber stocks. It's about preventing deforestation, maintaining that resource.
So it's actively managing the source.
Yes. And what's really key here is how sustainability connects everything. How you get your materials, how you run your factories, which brings in renewable energy.
Ah, like wind power, solar.
Right. Shifting away from finite fossil fuels towards alternative, cleaner energy sources is a huge part of becoming truly sustainable. It touches every part of the business.
It sounds incredibly complex, though. I mean, shifting an entire supply chain or energy source? Are there, like, hidden challenges or trade-offs companies face when they try to do this?
Oh, absolutely. One big challenge is the hidden supply chain. A company might look great on the surface, maybe solar panels on the roof, good recycling in the office. But what if their suppliers, maybe halfway across the world, are using terrible practices, polluting rivers, using unethical labor, relying on coal power?
So the company's own footprint looks okay, but the overall impact is still massive.
Exactly. Managing that entire chain, getting transparency from suppliers, it's incredibly difficult. That's where you hear about Scope 3 emissions, the indirect emissions up and down the value chain. It's a huge undertaking to track and reduce those.
Wow. Okay. So we've covered cleaning up pollution, managing waste via recycling, and this bigger long-term goal of sustainability, including the whole supply chain. To really talk about this stuff and understand what companies are actually doing, we need the right words, the right vocabulary.
Definitely. The language here matters a lot, and sometimes it can be used, well, strategically.
Right. So let's maybe break down some key terms. Understanding these feels crucial, especially for spotting when things aren't quite as green as they seem.
Okay, good idea. Let's start with environmental credentials. Pretty straightforward. It's just the evidence a company provides to show it cares about the environment. Actions, data, reports.
Proof, basically.
Proof, yes. Then there's a useful distinction between environmental degradation and environmental devastation.
Okay.
Degradation means damage, a decline in environmental quality. Devastation is much more severe, widespread destruction, ecosystems fundamentally altered, maybe recovery is impossible.
So like pollution versus a massive oil spill causing irreversible damage.
Kind of, yeah. It's about the scale and severity of the impact.
Okay.
Then you have the environmental lobby. These are the pressure groups, think Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth.
The campaigners.
Right. They campaign, raise awareness, push governments and companies. Very influential. And related to that are environmental standards. These are the actual rules, the benchmarks, often set by governments that companies are supposed to follow.
The baseline for acceptable behavior.
Exactly. But now, a really critical term, especially today, greenwashing.
Ah, yes, greenwashing. Heard this one a lot. What does it really mean in practice, and why is it such a problem?
So greenwashing is when a company talks up its environmental efforts, maybe in reports or ads, to give a much better impression than the reality justifies.
Like focusing on one tiny good thing while ignoring a much bigger bad thing?
Precisely. They might highlight, say, using recycled office paper, but completely ignore the massive pollution from their main manufacturing process. It's basically deceptive marketing disguised as environmental concern.
Okay, so it's misleading, but what's the harm beyond just, tricking consumers? Does it have bigger consequences?
Oh, absolutely. It's quite insidious. First, it seriously erodes public trust. If people feel duped by one company's green claims, they start becoming cynical about all green claims.
Even the genuine ones.
Exactly, which makes it harder for companies that are making real efforts to stand out and be rewarded by consumers or investors. Second, it distracts from real solutions.
How so?
Well, a company might pour money into a flashy green marketing campaign instead of investing in, say, actually reducing their emissions or cleaning up their supply chain. It allows harmful practices to continue behind a green facade.
And it makes our job as citizens trying to make informed choices much harder, right?
Immensely harder. You constantly have to be skeptical, try to look behind the slogans, demand real evidence, not just nice words. It puts the burden of verification on us, the public.
That's a really crucial point.
Yep.
Wow, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. From the nitty-gritty of pollution types, air, water, waste, and the regulations trying to control them, to the push for recycling, its own complexities, and why landfills and incinerators aren't long-term answers. Then broadening out to sustainability, thinking about resources, supply chains, renewable energy.
That whole system view.
Right. And finally, getting the language right. Understand credentials, standards, and especially being alert to greenwashing. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But these aren't just abstract concepts. They really do shape the world we live in, the choices we make every day, consciously or not. Differentiating genuine effort from, well, just talk is becoming essential. Absolutely. So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. Considering all these challenges, the pollution we need to stop, the waste we need to manage, this huge goal of true sustainability, and the constant risk of greenwashing, what does environmental responsibility really mean for a company today? And thinking about that, what role do you play in actually holding them accountable?
A powerful question to ponder.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.